In October of 1972, a Fairchild FH-227D military charter took off from Uruguay. On board was a tight-knit rugby team, along with their friends and family, heading for a friendly match in Santiago, Chile. To reach Chile, they had to cross the Andes. Looking at this map of their route, you can see the fatal mistake. The co-pilot miscalculated his navigation and radioed air traffic control, confident they had cleared the Planchon Pass. Thinking they were safely over Chilean flatlands, he began his descent. In reality, they were still surrounded by some of the tallest peaks on the continent. Pushing through the clouds, the plane hit an extreme drop in air pressure. The pilot tried to pull up, but they were too low. The right wing struck a mountain and snapped off. The left wing followed. The remaining fuselage plummeted at 350 kilometers per hour, slamming directly into the snowy terrain below. The impact instantly killed 5 people, and several more vanished into the snow. That left 33 injured survivors stranded inside a shattered metal tube. They were dressed for a South American spring in light t-shirts and slacks, suddenly trapped in a high-altitude, sub-zero wasteland. The geography itself was immediately and actively trying to kill them. Their initial reaction was to simply wait. They were certain the authorities knew their route, and that a rescue team was just a matter of hours, or maybe a few days away. They heard the distant drone of search planes and scrambled to signal them. The survivors gathered every tube of lipstick and nail polish they could find to write SOS on the roof of the plane. But the cosmetics quickly ran out, and their white fuselage remained perfectly camouflaged against the white snow. Assuming help was imminent, they heavily rationed what little food they had in the luggage. Lunch for an entire day was a single square of chocolate and a sip of wine measured out in a deodorant cap. Then, on their 17th day stranded, an avalanche tore through the broken fuselage while they slept. It buried the interior in freezing snow, killing 8 more people and destroying the only shelter they had left. By expecting salvation from the outside world, they were actively preventing themselves from doing what was necessary to survive. Waiting for help kept them paralyzed, while the cold and starvation drained their bodies. Among the passengers was a young man named Marcelo. Digging through the luggage in the cockpit, he managed to salvage some batteries and wire them into a broken radio receiver. He tuned into a Chilean station and heard a devastating news report that would break most people. The international search operation for the Uruguayan flight had been permanently called off. Marcelo turned off the radio, gathered the freezing survivors, and announced that he had good news. His fellow passengers were furious, but Marcelo explained his logic. The search being canceled was good because it provided total, agonizing certainty. No one was coming. They were completely on their own. That single realization shattered their paralyzing hope. It forced them to accept that if they were going to get off that mountain, they would have to engineer their own rescue. This chart tracks the biological math of their situation. The remaining 19 survivors were starving to death. Grown men saw their weight plummet from 80 kilograms down to under 30 kilograms. They were losing the baseline energy required to stand up, let alone walk. To solve this, they gathered together and made a pact. They agreed that to stay alive, they would have to consume the bodies of the dead outside the plane. They also gave each other explicit permission that if they themselves died, the living could use their bodies too. This was a calculated, unified decision born out of absolute necessity. It was the ultimate commitment to each other, ensuring that the death of a friend would directly contribute to the survival of the group. Those new calories stopped their physical decline. It gave them the energy to stop waiting inside the wreckage and start actively planning an expedition out of the mountains. With a destination in mind, they stripped the cotton and insulation from the plane's seats. Using salvaged copper wire, they wove the materials together to build extreme weather sleeping bags capable of keeping an expedition team alive in the snow. They could only build those supplies because they had the physical strength to do so. Crossing the ultimate psychological boundary gave them the biological fuel necessary to launch an escape. In mid-December, the 3 physically strongest survivors packed their makeshift sleeping bags and headed west. This map shows their planned route, a steep 60-kilometer ascent toward what they believed was the edge of the Andes. They climbed for days without crampons, ropes, or proper boots, fighting altitude sickness and freezing winds.
They expected to crest the final ridge and look down into the green valleys of Chile. Instead, standing at the summit, they saw nothing but an endless expanse of snow-capped peaks stretching all the way to the horizon. Knowing their food supply would never last the distance for all three of them, they made a split-second, ruthless calculation. They sent one man back down the mountain to the fuselage, leaving his rations behind so the remaining two could push forward. Staring at an impossible mountain range, they didn't stop to wait. Their drive to survive was now completely self-sustained. The two men hiked for several more days until the snow finally gave way to soil. They reached a rushing river and, looking across the rapids, spotted a local man on horseback tending to some cows. The water was far too loud for them to shout across, so the next morning, the man threw a rock wrapped in paper over the river. The two survivors wrote down exactly who they were, tied the paper back to the rock, and hurled it across the water. Once the authorities read that note, helicopters were dispatched to the crash site. Exactly 72 days after they disappeared from the sky, the remaining 14 passengers were pulled from the mountain. 16 people walked away from an impossible crash. They survived because they abandoned the comfort of waiting for a rescue that wasn't coming, and took absolute, brutal ownership of their own fate.